right, the gang is all together again this week, and next week we will be recording live from Pitchstock. So if you don't already have your Pitchstock ticket, we have a few more in-person tickets, and then virtual is always available. Virtual is, you can join live, you can interact if you join live, you can ask questions, we monitor the chat, you can hear everything, or we also provide the recordings to everyone that purchased it. So if you can't be at every single session, don't have that be an excuse not to be there. So it's always fun. I was like, this year, we're becoming pros at it. So I'm like stressed that I'm not stressed about it, but I'm not stressed about it. It's going to be great. So join us, talk about return to pitch, in-game data, individualizing pitchers, which is going to be part of our topic today. What else we got that we're talking about? Incorporating data for the first time for staffs. Strength and conditioning for pitchers. Got a lot of good topics. So be there or don't, and you'll miss out, but I just being there. All right. So today's topic, we're talking about some of our college athletes and sort of their transition back into campus, and this concept that has come up in a variety of ways, sort of like first sparked our brain from our college athletes, but it's come up in some of the conversations we've had with college coaches as we're going into the year of helping support college staffs. It comes up with teams, and it also comes up with athletes who reach out to us and want to kind of understand our training and our training model, which is really this topic of individualization. So obviously one of our things is that all of our programs for our athletes are individualized. We feel pretty strongly that there should be some level of individualization, but I think often that concept is misinterpreted and feels really out of reach sometimes when you're a college coach, for instance, and you're trying to work with 20 hitters, or you're a team coach and you're trying to work with a team, or you're an instructor and you're trying to figure out like this one-on-one versus group model and what makes sense. And so I think, a lot of the expectations around individualization sometimes make it try to be synonymous with one-on-one training, or that, me and Ashley are going to be in a cage next to each other hitting, and every single thing we do is going to be different. And that level of individualization is required. And that's really not what individualization for us looks like. And so when people feel like it's out of reach in group settings, I often just think like that's just because you're maybe kind of misunderstanding what it might look like for athletes. And it doesn't need to feel so out of reach. And really, it should make some of your job easier. So you would, attack the hitters or pitchers' issues more, and also a little bit more hands-off on like, you don't need to be in every sort of like station with them for them to get something out of it. So we just kind of want to like dive through a few examples of that. Maybe I'll just first lay out kind of how we do programming on an individualized basis. And Ashley can add from the pitching side, and then we can get into some like specific areas this comes up in college really is the big one. But we, all of our athletes that start with us are going to have some level of information that they start with us. So that could be at the most minimal, just what they give us. So playing level, age, we'll have an idea of puberty, past injuries, what pitches they throw if they're a pitcher, just like general goals. That would be the absolute most basic information that we would have on an athlete. Obviously, the level of individualization that can be done on that athlete is not as great, but we can take into consideration their age, their training age, their time of year. There's some level, and really most of that would be like a periodization concept for that athlete and not as much individualized to their sort of mechanics or performance. Most of our athletes on top of that have some sort of performance data. So ball flight, we have an idea of exit velocity, bat speed, some general, what pitches do they do, hit well, launch angle. For pitching, we have an idea of how their pitches break, sort of like a pitch profile. And so that would feed us another level of information of, based on what we see here, these are the types of things we would want to attack in training. And then obviously the most detailed version of what we would receive is that someone starts with our biomechanics assessment. So we get the full story of, yes, this is your performance, and then also this is how you move inside the skill, and here's the kind of areas that we want to attack. So once we have that information, that gives us different levels of individualization. What that doesn't mean is that Sally, that only has an intake form, starts with a template, and Susie with a biomechanics assessment, we go line by line and change it. That's not true. The biomechanics assessment gives us some buckets, some general buckets of some of the patterns of things that we see. We see loss of posture in the swing. We see a lack of rotation. We see, different things that come up. And we have some general systems in place for how we attack those things, given those. And we give an idea of what data we're watching, and that's the concept. Sally, that struggles with posture, this program might look similar to Susie, who, lacks some rotation at contact, that we might attack some of those things in the same way. But what I think is important going into that is that the athlete is very educated in what they are trying to attack, and that they can kind of control that process on their own as well. So that's how we do programming. So if someone's coming into our facility to do that, they are coming in with other athletes, but they are all following their own individual programs, and they are working through that in a group setting. So I will have a sense of, if Susie's working on loss of posture and she has Hookem in her program, the types of things that we might want to watch for that for her. And we would just give some limited feedback and cues on that, and she would work through that. So that's how we think of individualization. I think sometimes there's this idea that, like I said, every line item needs to be different, or I need to be standing on top of that kid for it to be individualized. Or obviously there's the other extreme, and we can get into this on the hitting side, where we're like, I have 20 kids, so there can't be any individualization. We literally just go through stations together and we do all the same things. There's kind of those extremes of understanding it, but I think just getting this idea of what does it mean to be individualized. I think it's important for athletes to understand this too, because I think sometimes when athletes don't feel like someone is right on top of them, or they see that they're doing a similar drill to another athlete, they're like, I didn't even get any individual work. It's like, that also is probably a little bit of an extreme view of that. So it's this like balance of understanding that. Did I miss anything with that concept?
I don't think so. I've got a lot of shit to say. Just wrote down.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Shocker. Shocking no one. Okay. One of the things that came to my brain as you were talking is, I think individualization, just generally, I don't think coaches always get it right, but I think generally, it's understood that individualization, some level of it is necessary, at least at the college level, in pitching, because everyone has different pitches, right? Like there is literally an individual nature to what pitchers do. She has a great changeup. This pitcher struggles with changeup. She's an up ball pitcher. She's a down ball pitcher. So like, we just kind of get that concept. So I'm going to revisit that, but I do think it's interesting that I think generally hitting really gets the short end of the stick. I feel like that's, no pun intended, maybe pun intended, but yeah, it was. But I think hitting really gets the short end of the stick in that, because it's like, oh, it's swing, it's your swing, it's posture, it's rotation, and it can become these really simple buckets. Not to say that you don't start with these buckets. It's the same in pitching. It's like your challenge is, and there's more specific of like, oh, why isn't that athlete rotating well? Where does it start? How do we target it? So it does always start at the like mechanics level for sure. And there's a bucket, and then there's a more individualized like component to why that athlete even fits in that bucket. The reason why I think hitting gets the short end of the stick is because there's so many athletes, they don't have individual ball flight. And so we see coaches kind of go after these very generalized buckets. Maybe it is just, she's working on rotation and she's working on posture. I don't know. I'm kind of making shit up here, but like, we're just putting those two buckets. And sometimes it's as simple as like, we've seen like motor preference. I see where people want to lean into something like that. She's aerial terrestrial. Now, there's a whole nother discussion on whether or not you can even bucket like that and training adaptations, whatever, but that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is when you just take, here's one bucket and that's where 50% of my hitters go, and here's another bucket and that's where 50% of my hitters go. It's completely missing the mark, because in pitching, take away the pitch types. What you are still working on is, okay, she's this general bucket. Where in her patterns, where and why is that happening? Where is it like starting and unraveling in her patterns? And then what impact is that having on her arm? So then what implements, we've talked about this before, of like training implements, overload, underload, all of these things. What is that doing to her arm? that same athlete who is struggling with rotation, A, this is a pitcher, athlete B also struggles with rotation. But athlete A, what it does, it's turn into excessive elbow flexion for her, or abduction, meaning her arms outside of her trunk. And the other athlete, it ends up in being in like a really stiff arm action. So you have to, what our assessment process is about is, yes, it starts as a bucket, but the individual nature of why you have to be able to attack, that's a roots versus symptoms. And then the arm is what matters. And it's the same in hitting. It's why we have these discussions. You can't just say, oh, it's this bucket and that bucket. Okay, but what if then the results of that is that this athlete's barrel path goes here versus here? Right. This is now the individual layer of like, she needs a short bat with a, this, whatever environments you're designing with. She's going angle in, angle out. We're throwing her balls that look like this at this level, at this speed with this bat. This is where all this comes in. So in my mind, yes, of course, there's individualization, an extra layer of that for pitchers, because now there's a whole nother, it's why programming takes forever for pitchers, because we start with that, which is identical to hitters. That's an identical process of individualization. And then there's this extra layer of like, okay, literally, what are our goals for her drop ball? What are the goals for that curveball, right? So there's this next layer of pitch by pitch individualization, which makes just programming for pitchers more. It takes more. Right. So do I think that it takes as much to individualize programming for hitters? I don't. But there's also more of them, right? And on a team. And so I think when we're talking at the college level, you could talk about the youth level. I still think the lesson model, pitchers show up and they don't individualize shit. They just all are doing the same drills or whatever. So of course there are worlds that exist like that. And that's just like, I don't mean to be condescending, but like, we don't really have time to talk about that. That's just bad, And so I think when we're really talking about the college level, I do think coaches, they may not go about individualization in a way that maybe we think is best, but they are individualizing because of the nature of the beast. And I just think hitting, we miss it, man. We go with one blanket. You go in the bucket of X, you go in the bucket of Y. It's like, that is so.
I think what takes what does take a lot of time for hitting is the tracking of the data on the back end. It's why the visualizations we're trying to create are helpful. But when you have 20 kids and you're trying to watch trends, it's why their education on it is important. It's why narrowing down what you're watching. So I have an athlete who just assessed. She has her athlete meeting today. I was going through her information. This is the type of things we would see from an assessment in a hitter. She has, she loses posture in her swing. That's a kind of common thing. So during her move, she loses posture. She has very high exit velocity. This is a kid that's already committed to Division I. She's got good power. But in her ball flight, so we see in her biomechanics, she loses posture. She gets under rotated because of it. It's not actually impacting exit velocity that much. So that's interesting for her, which means she probably even has a higher elite exit velocity on the table. But she doesn't get to low pitches. So for her specifically, because of how she loses her posture and the body position she gets in when she rotates, she can't get her barrel to that low pitch. And so as an example, that kid, so she loses her sort of backside early. Her, the weight she has on her back leg comes up early, and it kind of pulls her out of posture. So that is something we see in many hitters. That is a bucket, I would say, that we would have of like, she needs to be able to kind of stabilize through the back leg longer as she's going through, the start of rotation. And so we might do something for that athlete, like a hook 'em start type, like a sort of pivot start type is another one we might do, where we're really trying to like have her sit. It's not a great term, but sit in that back leg longer and hold posture. And that might look very similar to Susie right next to her that also struggles with posture, and that's what happens. Now, similar to what you're saying, what we see is that those two hitters, though, likely have different results of that. So Susie might lose posture, and what that causes her to do is she hyperextends through rotation, and she actually can't get the up pitch. And so what we attack for those things are what you're saying. That's what determines the different angles we're going after. It determines the different bats, often that they're swinging outside of just like normal overload training. And then, and sort of most importantly, it informs how I talk to those two people about what our goals are in training, what they should expect. Listen, your mishits when you are struggling with this look like X. A low pitch is going to go straight to the ground for you. Up pitch is going to go like, there's a college hitter we have right now that does that. She gets a kind of a weird, funky bat path. And so she has backspin in her program, and when she's not making adjustments, the balls go, they're swing and misses, or they go straight up in the air. And she knows that. We're working through posture. It's giving her feedback. It's specific to her. It's telling her what we're going for. And then the data that we are tracking to see whether the program is working is not just like, yes, we post all the time on social media when exit velocity goes up and things like that. That's sort of like just like pitch velo. I mean, it's a great, but what we're looking at is you struggle with low and in. If we are fixing posture, we should see that start to change. We should see that we can still hold the outside pitch, but we can also start getting to the inside pitch better. And so it gives us an idea of what we're measuring. And so these are the conversations I'm having with a lot of our college athletes who have been training this summer is don't go back. Your expectation should not be to go back into your college program and someone's going to stand right across from you and give you a one-on-one lesson and an individualized program. What your or an individualized program, like, you know, kind of what we talked about line by line. What your experience this summer should have given you is the knowledge to understand who you are as a hitter and sort of understand when X happens, that means Y. And this is sort of what I need to tap into to fix that. That's what the loop is. And that's what individualization and hitting means. So you could very easily, we have a whole sort of part of our hitting training where we talk about team training. You could very easily, I think, as a college, be in stations. Like, I don't think this is, you need this small group setting where you only have 3 hitters. You could be in stations. It's just going to require some front end work of whatever level of access you have to some sort of assessment, whether that's just ball flight, whether that's video, I guess, but be careful, whether that's, you know, a full biomechanics assessment of those hitters. It's this initial download of information. It's having a conversation with that hitter of, this is what we see. This is what's going to hold you back. This is what we see. Like, this is what we're going for. And then really giving them that front load education of, when we're doing this drill, this is the types of things you're going to see. And this is the type that might be very different than the person standing next to you and what they're going to see. It's going through that. You're going to then get to a place at the end of fall, very similar to pitching, when we get to a place in pitching where we're like, whatever you have, you have. We're not still chasing spin. Hitters get to the same place. You're not going to fill every bucket as a hitter. So I always think of, like, Altuve is like my favorite spray chart because he is a major league, one of the best hitters that has existed, and has a heat map that's like one pitch, and somehow he still just murders it because he knows that so well about himself. And people, even at the highest level of the game, make mistakes and he matches it. So you also then get to this place in the fall, which goes to individualization too, where it's January. And now I sit down with my hitters and be like, okay, we worked really hard on that. And we got to the place where middle in is covered, but low in is still a tough pitch for you. And so that's probably not something we're going to go attack first pitch. You know, that's not a pitch that you can get to great because we don't think the outcomes are going to be great. So that's another level of individualization, is educating them on what are the pitches I'm attacking. If I do see a down pitcher and she knows to really come in on me inside, what are some adjustments I should make? Should I move in the box, like attacking things that way? So that to me is what individualization looks like. And it's very similar. In the way that in hitting or in pitching, it impacts your arm, and hitting, it usually, impacts your bat path. And that's kind of what you're individualizing.
Yeah, and the next 2 bullets that I wrote from earlier are right on point with that. It's like what it requires is prep and planning, this front end work.
Right.
The reason why coaches think that they need to have a one-on-one is that communication is happening on the spot. If you are a type of coach where you are going to be educating your athlete on the spot in that training session, yeah, I bet you're going to take a one-on-one. But it's not. It's actually like it should be happening like at a table and chairs. Mm-hmm. Like we should be in the office. Now, you said like, oh, be careful with video. It doesn't mean your individual plan needs to be good. I mean, we'd hope it would be. We think the plans we write are good because we collect a ton of data and objective data, and then we get the data to keep giving us feedback. But just say someone doesn't have any of that. You're still going to create goals, think about what you think is happening, create a plan. It might, at the end of the day, not be a good plan if we were to actually have the data, but at least it's a plan. That's how to individualize, So it requires here's what we think you're good at. Here's what we think or we know because of the data. I don't know. That just depends on your resources, I guess. But here's what we think. Here's what we know that you're good at. Here's what you're struggling with. Here's why. Here's how we're going to attack it. Let's go through the plan. And so I think it's that front end. I think the other thing is this is also a very lesson model. It's not just the one-on-one. It's thinking that something needs to get fixed at the end of a session. When then you think you have to have coach oversight, because if your athletes are not comfortable finishing a training session and it still wasn't great, it's like when we build plans, we build multiple days a week over 4 weeks, and it doesn't change, and you just keep going, you keep going. Now, in season, we wouldn't be doing something like that. At the college level, we're trying to go like, what was the issue last weekend? What are we going to do this week to fix it for next weekend? But I'm assuming you're in some sort of like off season, you're not in, January through May. And so I think basically you have to know if your athlete is educated, you got to let her fly. You got to let her to start to navigate those things on your own. And then if there's 8 pitchers in the bullpen in one day, I mean, you're probably 4 and 4, 6 at a time, who knows? You're kind of walking through, okay, tell me what's going on. Hey, I just feel like I'm still struggling with X because the ball is still doing this. Look for that information from them, that you spent that front end time giving them. And then like, okay, what have you done? I've done this. I said, okay, let's try this. You might, obviously, there's the art of coaching. Give them some feedback, see if that helps. And then you walk away from them. You've got to let them get the education, explore it on their own, go for it, make sure they can verbalize it back to you, and then keep flowing with your athletes. I mean, it's literally the OGX in-person training setup.
Well, I was going to say, and I think, Laura, this would be interesting for you to kind of touch on, but I think that, like, I had a conversation with a college hitter, so she's remote. And so we do weekly calls, and often we go through video. And I think what has been great about the transition as the summer goes on is that it starts as like, and she had an assessment. We went through exactly what we were going for. We did talk about the data. We don't have access to regular data right now, but like the types of ball path that, off the bat, we would see if we're making some progress in the things that we want to see. But she went from just like waiting for me to tell her things each week to this week. She was like, can you pull up this drill and this drill? And then we did, and I pulled it up, and she was like, okay, on the first one of this, I remember I rolled over it. On the second one, I kind of flared it to right field. Can we look through like what the difference was? And what we got to is like, there is no difference. Those actually are the same result for you. It's just literally like the pitch location was slightly different, but they're the same bad result for you. So the feel that you're trying to correct is similar on those two. And we talked through it. We talked through what drill she feels best on posture that might translate to that, of like, let's close that loop for you. When you roll over one, backspin was something she felt like helped her posture. Go back to the feel of what you felt like you are correcting on backspin on that next one and see how it feels. So we talked through what would your process be when you're seeing these results. I had a similar conversation with another college athlete who trains in person with us, where her feedback was like, I'm feeling very consistent in my swing. Like my swing feels more consistent, like it's not varying, but the results feel a little inconsistent still. And then I feel like I don't always know what change to make based on a bad result. And so what we talked about is what she's been doing these last 2 weeks is now a coach has been standing behind her, not to coach, but to slow her down. And so basically she swings. She's got the viewpoint on hit tracks where the video is looping for her. If it's a missed result, we would not do this forever. She's doing it for 2 weeks as practice. She turns around and says, I'm going to think X. I'm going to try to stay on top of this next one. Then she does it. She watches the video, and we're just practicing teaching her that loop. What her and I talked about, and this is what I think would be interesting to hear you talk about, Laura, is that like you might say, on this next one, I'm going to drive my hands to the ball. And I might think that is a weird thing to think about because we don't drive our hands to the ball. But as long as I think, that hitter is educated enough in her swing and the goal she is going for, she can think whatever she wants. Is the next result better? And is the loop getting shortened for her? And so what I said to this hitter was, that's why you go on MLB Network and you hear A-Rod say, I drove my knob to the ball. And you're like, no, you didn't. But at some point in his process, he thought that, and it gave him a good result, and it worked. Now, what is dangerous, and this is kind of not dangerous, it's probably aggressive, and this is what I think would be interesting, is when you are trying to individualize things like that. It's why one-on-one training is not usually good and actually is not individualized. It's like individualized by the coach, kind of what you're saying, Ashley, if I'm trying to control the outcome. Is what is worse is when I go up to that hitter, she has a bad result, and I say, drive your hands to the ball. So she's like, got it. Drives her hands to the ball, does do that. has a better outcome or something that time, and then is like, now I'm supposed to drive my hands to the ball, and starts sort of like extrapolating that in a
Yeah,
way
it's an
that
external
isn't.
cue. I just thought of like what are they called? Like the marionettes, like the
Yeah. And
like
so
that's
you're
what I think
getting
of. That's my
to a
visual in my
place
head.
of like, that hitter doesn't understand why you said that cue. You just said a random cue, and then they try to adopt it very like concretely. They might actually adopt it very concretely, but then they don't understand why they adopt it. So now they have a bad result 2 months from now, and they're like, oh yeah, I got to go down to the ball. And like, that's not what they should be doing in that moment.
Probably most athletes rarely need a one-on-one for a physical reason. It's usually a mental, emotional, like I need to connect. You know what I'm saying? Laura, go ahead. You were going to chime in about cueing, I think.
Yeah, this conversation is so cool. As you guys have been talking, the way I've been kind of visualizing it in my brain is like it's setting up a quality experiment, right? If you're doing that front end work as a coach, and you have your buckets, you have maybe a starting point. So we would call them protocols, right? That from our volume of assessments that we've had, we can quickly now bucket athletes initially, and all you're doing there, you're not saying that's where you're stuck forever. So I think that to me is a little of the danger of saying you 50% are this way and 50% of this way and you don't change. I think that's the danger of that, is that you're taking a presumed bucket based on your knowledge as a coach, your understanding of the outcomes and the things that they need to do as a hitter or a pitcher, and you're saying, this is what I think the experiment needs to be for them. I'm going to set up a plan. I'm going to write a hypothesis. I'm going to literally put in the scientific method. I'm going to write a hypothesis. I'm going to say, this is what I think your plan should be. We are going to do this for a period of time. Right. So again, I keep going back to like it just completely sort of debunks the lesson model of controlling the outcome. If I am setting up a good experiment for an athlete to explore movement, to, Krista, what you said about, miss hits and understanding where things went wrong or what your timing was, or maybe an intent piece, is amazing. Like, those are the results of the experiment. They're not things to control and manipulate and make sure that the end result is the same every single time. The experiment is the athlete's application of that program, and your job, so that you don't necessarily influence or bias or try to manipulate and puppeteer, as I like that word, to puppeteer the outcome, is you have to let it ride for a little bit, and the time period is very relevant to time of year. Krista, you mentioned we're only doing that for 2 weeks, but I'm going to guess that after that 2 weeks, that hitter can more quickly say, all right, I see what I did there. I felt this, and they can connect those two things. And it's not just an internal feel. There needs to be external information as well to sort of validate that, right? And so the conversation of, well, actually for you, this challenge in your swing just resulted in something different because the pitch was different. That's external to you. Internally, you did the same thing. And so it's the merging of those two things where you really get to test your experiment. And so the value of data and video and, all these external pieces obviously gives that sort of quality of the experiment. And then to me, that art of coaching is then, how are you helping the athlete to execute your experiment? How are you helping them to tap into the things that you've planned for them? We do that for a period of time. For us, that's 4 weeks. And then we go, did it work or not? Right? I mean, that is just the most basic application of just setting up an experiment, having a guess at what you're going to do, seeing what happens in that process. And again, time of year, if we're in season, we don't have time to let it ride for 4 weeks. So those approaches are a little different. But from a development standpoint, and if you want hitters in season and pitchers in season to be able to, in massive air quotes, make adjustments, they need to know what mistakes feel like, to know when to make that adjustment, and what mistakes mean what adjustments. Otherwise, they're just flying blind. They're like, oh, well, pitcher beat me that day. And it's like, no, actually, maybe you beat yourself that day. And right. I think that art of coaching, it doesn't replace the coach. Your job is to guide and navigate, to help, see them through that experiment. And sure, there are plenty of times, especially very early on in our work, I think about all the times we change plyo programs sort of like week to week, you are experimenting. And so it can take some iteration. It can take some pattern recognition. Our advantage is the volume of that we see in assessments, and we also see that translate in training. I think at a college coach level, it's not impossible. It does not mean, like you said, a one-on-one, but it does mean setting up your experiments, having some appreciation for, all right, what do I think this hitter is going to need right now? And even if you're wrong, you're wrong. It's okay. It's an experiment. The results of an experiment can be, it didn't work. It's then the art of coaching to say, that's not working for her. That's a bad intent, or that's not a great intent for her, or that, that short bat or that plyo weight didn't do it. We got to switch that. And so that's the art of coaching. It's recognizing the response of the athlete to your experiment. And I just, as you guys were talking, I kept thinking man, this one-on-one lesson model doesn't do any of that. It's sort of the opposite. It's influencing the outcome of the 30-minute to 1 hour experiment for a manipulated end result sometimes. And
right. Well,
there's no longevity there.
The hallmark.
There's no longevity there. Good one, Laura.
It's like the hallmark of individualization, and it's like the worst version of individualization.
Terrible,
so
yeah.
people are like, I want to be on this. I want to have a coach standing right behind me. And we're like, it's the worst example of individualization, because it's the furthest removed from the reality of how you're going to be able to make change and adjustments and sort of like the learning that has to happen. I was just thinking that hitter example I gave, where she loses her posture and struggles with low and in. What I also didn't give is that, so she had the privilege of going through the force plate measurement, which is what we're starting to work on with Driveline. And so there's some nuanced strength and power stuff we got. And so that same athlete, what also came to light from that is she's a very high strength kid and not low. I shouldn't say low. She's a Division I athlete, so not low. 80%. It's over 100% in just pure strength, and in the 80 percentile mark across all of the sort of power measurements. And so it's interesting from that standpoint too, is we have a athlete who struggles with variability and adjustability, which often power is required for that. This ability to kind of time how you're getting your power off. She has high exit velocity because she has good strength. So she's able to get this sort of force. And so that's another way that you would individualize that athlete, is one, her strength and conditioning should be targeting that. We shouldn't be just let's just keep going up and wait and wait and wait. This is an athlete who already has the strength required to do things, that needs to move faster and understand it, so that the work we're doing on the hitting side is matching. We're trying to get variability for this athlete on the hitting side. And so her assessment needs to match that. She also lacked rotation in her assessment. So it's these things that we're seeing in there, those are also playing into the individualization, and you're not going to solve all of that on the hitting side. So there's a level of individualization in, where am I attacking this thing? I'm attacking posture just by mechanics in sort of the pattern programming I'm doing. Probably some version of that, but am I also attacking that in the strength and conditioning I'm doing, and what does that need to look like, and sort of matching all those buckets. It's just another level of individualization, which should pull some of it off of your plate as the coach, because not everything can be solved from you. I remember years ago I was having a conversation with a college coach, hitting coach, and she was like, we've been doing, I can't remember what she did, she showed a thoracic rotation type of, we've been doing this to really work on thoracic rotation. And I said, that's not your job. And she was like, what? I'm like, getting your hitter's thoracic rotation is not your job. If that, first of all, there's no way every single one of your hitters struggles with thoracic rotation. So the idea that every single one of them is doing a thoracic rotation exercise, fine, maybe in part of the warm up or something, but just know why you're doing it. Is it an activation thing? Is there a purpose? But doing that to chase thoracic rotation is not the hitting coach's job. So I think sometimes individualization gets very overwhelming when we start also pulling in things into individualization that is not actually in my job description. So getting a hitter thoracic rotation might be something I need to know as a hitting coach, but it's certainly not something I should be responsible for, because that's just not my job. That's the strength coach's job. Getting whatever, knowing that my hitters have bad hip mobility is probably part of my AT's job. So I think it's just really understanding that too, is you're not chasing all of those things as a coach. And I think that takes away of they should have more individualization, because they should have individualization across all of these buckets. but less of it should be on your plate than maybe sometimes we take on as coaches. And we did that a lot when we first started doing movement assessments. We're like, okay, got it. My job now is to make sure this kid can stabilize and have rotation and separate and do all these things. We're doing all these movement preps. And it was like, that's not my job. So it was like, go see James for that part and then come back over to me for the hitting part. And then we'll make sure that those are talking together and you understand them. So I think that's another piece of it.
And they're warmed up and prepped for the task of hitting. Right, they're warmed up specifically. Right. There's a dynamic component. We call it movement prep, but there is a preparation as an extension or maybe a narrowing of the skill, pitching or hitting. That's an extension of strength and conditioning. You, as the pitching coach and the hitting coach, when they step in the circle or the box, that's what you get. Right in that moment, they're coming in with their mental state, their physical state, whatever mobility and strength they have for that moment, that day, that week. And so your job again is then to apply your program and see what's not working. And so if something's not working and you can identify that is a mobility challenge, then it's got to go back sort of under the coach in that way. So they need to hand you an athlete, and that you need to know what their capacity is. That capacity can grow, it can change. We know fatigue is a massive factor, not just in pitching, but in hitting. And that's what you've got to understand kind of in the moment of that athlete is what are they bringing into the circle or the box with them? And it's not necessarily your job to fix that, but you have to identify the impact that it is having on their pitching patterns or their swing. You have to identify the impact.
I think a huge part of this, is it's why we don't really use mechanics. Like I know we're using that a little bit here, but we use patterns a lot. And I think we kind of did it unintentionally. I think we just started switching to that because of what mechanics is tied to so often. When a parent calls, like, I had a parent call and they're like, she's got good mechanics, but we're stuck in velocity. And I am just like, whatever that means. I think there's this idea of mechanics. It's like getting to the definition of what is mechanics, and the idea of individualization, to your point, Ashley, is like it's a bunch of coaches and athletes who think their job is to chase perfect mechanics. And that's not what we're going for here. I laughed because we had a post that went out. Kay, our hitting lead, put it out. It was like an athlete saying, I don't use tea in pregame because tea doesn't really help me prep for the game. And someone commented, which I hid because I don't like angry people, like get a life. But especially when the kid is talking in the video, I'm like, okay. But he was like, this is stupid or something. Like, when are you working on mechanics? And Kay wrote back, to her credit, her response was like, not before a game. And he was like, well, you can't hit if you don't have good mechanics. And she wrote like, that's why we trade. But I was like, that is the thing, right? Is that literally this person thinks the job of pre-game tee warm-up is for a coach to like make sure the mechanics are good, whatever that means, make sure the mechanics are good. And so I think some of this overwhelm with individualization or chasing individualization as parents and athletes comes from a really big misunderstanding of like, what are mechanics? I say this before we go through every biomech report, is that you're going to see these shaded norm ranges, right? You're going to see where are the norms of what most athletes kind of fall into. And for the most part, we will touch on when you are outside of those normative ranges or when you don't quite follow the like timing or shape of those normative ranges, even if maybe you stay inside, but the shape is different. But that doesn't mean every single time we see that, we're like, bad. The goal is never going to be to take that athlete and just shove her into the normative ranges, because what you're trying to understand is when you lose posture, as the kids were saying, what is the result of that? Okay, the result of that for you is as you lose posture and you fall out of the normative ranges that we see for posture, it makes you not rotate as much. It makes you not be able to get to that low and inside pitch. So we are going to want some correction for the posture, but like we're not just chasing perfect matching mechanics and stories to everyone. That's not the goal.
It's not possible.
So
no, when you actually have measurements of it. Yeah, when you actually measure it.
Capable of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We're just trying to, I think I got 3 more bullet points here that I wrote down, and they're all kind of negative. It's not really my vibe usually, but I was just thinking of like what people think making changes, like we get really stuck in this culture, definitely in pitching, like the will, the want to do it, the trying harder. It's like, that's just someone not educated on training adaptations. Like A pitcher can want to correct her ball path all she wants. Stop having her neutral ball path sliced to her arm side and be super committed in her training session. But literally, if we don't know the root of what's going on and why her arm action is being put there, and it's not ever going to get fixed on a single day. I don't care how good of an athlete she is, and I don't care how on fire her soul is. And so we have to shed this concept of like that making a change is about working harder. That's just like ridiculous. It's about training adaptations, and training adaptations take time, which is why you don't just stand over someone and make sure it's better in the session. You give it time. This is kind of what I was thinking about in that experimental, like when you were talking about it being an experiment, Laura, I thought that was a really great concept. And when you said like, there's no longevity, that's what it means. If you are actually going to make a change, it requires training adaptations. That takes longevity in the training approach in order for there to be longevity in the results. The other thing I was thinking, you guys got me talking at 1.5 speed now because Krista said I got 3 minutes.
2 minutes.
Which
2 minutes.
I'm happy to do, but the listeners probably don't understand.
I just got
The
other thing is, not to pull us aside here, but I got distracted because we just got an alert that Win Reality bought Yakratech, and Win Reality just also bought Blast. So anyways, that's really interesting and a totally different topic.
Okay,
but
another topic I do think we should bring on is strength and conditioning. Strength and conditioning is horrible at the collegiate level across the board. Not to say every single strength coach, the lack of individualization. We still have athletes doing like the inappropriate exercises that don't even match what's required in the motion, a lack of individualization for the similar reasons. Coaches are overwhelmed. They don't know how to do it. We've had a couple athletes in the summer program where their velo was like a PR during the assessment. And we've seen since then that it's just like going down, and I asked them about their dynamic warm-ups, and they don't even like have dynamic warm-ups. So we started putting in like our dynamic warm-ups to activate, to be able to like, that's a key indicator. When you show up at an assessment, you do our like activation series through our movement assessment. And that's when you move the best. So like clear indicator, huge hole. So that's definitely worth us kind of bringing back in. This is why, and it's just brutal out there. And I think it's just, we're bringing James into pitch doc to start to like open up this conversation a little bit more. And also I just kept thinking like, you guys know how I feel about this, and this is a little bit like maybe a little bit aggressive on my part, but I'm just thinking about, the hitting coaches and like these waves. It started with like loose mover, tight mover, and then like a couple years later, we're like, that ain't it. And now it's aerial terrestrial. We're like, dude, you don't know this yet, but that ain't it either. And so I think it's like hitting coaches, in my mind, overwhelmingly, this is aggressive. They're bad and they don't know it. And you guys know I keep saying this, but what they think identifying patterns is, what they think categorizing and training is it is missing the mark so badly. And so you guys know this, and I bring it up like every session because I'm like, I can't wait for HQ to get out there into more hitting coaches. We've pushed it more through the pitching world, because when you start to actually see the visualization and the data, she does not get to that pitch any better than she did in September. She is not hitting the ball any harder. Now, I think that wave has to start coming. And I think it's an interesting conversation, Chris, that you brought up, like, does hitting have to get better as long as the fences are 200 feet and whatever? There's a real conversation there. I get it. But I think, in my experience in working with pitching coaches at the collegiate level, knowing the ins and outs of what the hitters are doing, the overwhelming majority of cases that I have seen, the hitting coaches, they think they are doing a much better job than they are. They take these very simple, this bucket versus this bucket, and now they think, someone's a genius. And I think of like, it's got to get exposed, because I come at it more of a, like, you guys know, like the hitting world, like, always fires me up, pisses me off, because I'm like, I just think that, yes, the task of hitting is very difficult, but I just don't think we are holding it to the same level of like accountability that we do in pitching. And I think our HQ data management system is going to start to get that out there. So anyway, that was all pretty negative. I'm like, no one understands training adaptations. Hitting coaches are bad and strength and conditioning is shit. So
but from a pitching coach lens, that was spot on.
Okay. So I really, that's not really my vibe to be so negative, but I really do think each of these is an interesting conversation. And if we're going to push things forward across the board, you got to expose this stuff. I mean, this is like how we got in to this world at OGX with pitching. We exposed even our own shit. Like, this is not good enough. We are not actually changing pitchers, right? So I just think it's more of a call and a demand to start looking at the other components, which is the other side of the ball. And honestly, what fuels the fire to start, which is the basic level of human movement and strength and conditioning. All right, mic drop. I'm done saying.
All right. Well, we got to end anyways because we're out of time. So
all right.
Hopefully on that note, we'll see you at Pitch Talk. And the next week will be recorded live from Pitch Talk with our staff. So
see you then.
Tune in.
We need you to like and subscribe and review the podcast so that we can keep making it every week for you. And maybe even drop what topic you'd like us to talk about or rant about or whatever we do every week.